Gibbons. Thanks so much for being with us for today's webinar, Brand Journalism That Builds the Business. We're joined by two really extraordinary folks. I couldn't be more grateful to have them with us and have them sharing what they're learning. We're joined by Doug Busk. Doug is one of the leaders of President Obama's groundbreaking 2008 campaign. He led mobile there, and he now leads digital communications and social media for the Coca-Cola Company. Also with us today is an old, very dear friend of mine, Jenny Wilburn. We worked together many, many moons ago. Not so many. I don't want to date Jenny. I can date myself. But suffice to say, we worked together for some time back at CNN, and she's now the senior manager of digital communications and social media at Coke. So what we're going to talk about over the next hour, and we're grateful to have nearly 300 of you with us, we're going to be talking about brand journalism, or as I like to think about it, how to go over, under, and around traditional media. Something that the Obama White House did to amazing effect over the last 8 years. They were telling stories themselves with their messages on their own platforms. And the fact is, it hasn't just been the White House that's been trailblazing here. A number of for-profit companies, including the folks at Coke, Doug and Jenny, who have been quick to explore the idea of bringing a journalism approach to strategic communications. And guys, let's be honest here. We're all competing for attention and engagement in this day and age. They're having some pretty stunning success. Over 3 million folks are engaging with the Coca-Cola Journey project that Doug and Jenny lead every single month. So let's find out how they're doing it. Over the next hour, we're going to talk a little bit about how to create a brand newsroom and how that could make your communications more proactive, more nimble, and more engaging at your foundation and nonprofit. What building a brand newsroom could look like at your organization, how you actually staff it up and how you structure it, how you make it work, and why it's important to have tough conversations and engage in transparency while you're talking to, when you do these kinds of works, one of the things that actually opens you up to is an opportunity to have conversations with some of your critics and detractors, which for some of you on this call, you may not be huge fans of some of the work that Coca-Cola does, but they're going to talk about some of the experiences they've had, some of the rough seas that they've had to navigate. Now, just before I hand it over to Doug and Jenny, a couple quick logistical items. We do have a full house. Over 300 folks are with us, so we are going to try to take as many questions as we can. We're going to stop a couple of times during the course of this presentation to take questions. So go ahead. If you're looking in if you're with us in this ReadyTalk conference software, you'll see in your lower left-hand corner a chat box. That's how we're going to talk to each other. So go ahead and type your questions in there. Tristan and I will be monitoring them, and I'll moderate and get those questions to Doug and Jenny, as many of them as we can possibly fit in. We're also going to be asking you, if you'd like to, if you're joining us on Twitter, we're at the hashtag ComNetLive. That's COMNETLIVE. We'll be taking your questions both through ReadyTalk and through Twitter throughout this presentation. And as always, we are recording this conversation, so we will be posting it online at comnetwork.org for free replays. Feel free to share it with your colleagues and friends over the next couple of weeks. Thanks again for joining us. Let me go ahead and hand this off to my good friends Doug and Jenny. Guys, thanks so much for being with us and sharing what you're learning.
Well, thank you, and thanks everyone for taking time out of your busy days attending. I am tremendously honored to be here with you today. I know Jenny is as well. We love telling the story of Journey and encouraging brand journalism and storytelling as a method of getting word out on your organizations and frankly transforming what has been traditional communications and public affairs. I will say, just as another note of preface to the presentation, I was very excited for another reason when Jenny first presented the opportunity for us to engage you guys, because many of you are members of organizations that are near and dear to the heart of my other half, Sydney Zeldin. My wife runs a nonprofit by the name of Georgians for a Healthy Future. So she knows many of your organizations, if not several of you by name. So I live and breathe sort of the stories you tell, at least in the grant and fundraising communities, because that's what my wife does. So this is sort of a double dip, exciting opportunity for me personally. Just before we jump into the slides, the obligatory handles, if you want to tweet out to us in addition to the hashtags just mentioned, or email us. My email is doug@coca-cola.com, and Twitter handle is dbusk, @dbusk. Jenny is jw@coca-cola.com. We like to keep them nice and short in the team, and your handle is?
@JennyRW.
There we go, JennyRW. So we're going to talk in this first section before we get to the Q&A about the genesis of Journey. Why did we launch it, and what are we doing with it, and why has brand journalism become such an important platform for the company? And that's really a great place to start. We launched Journey 4.5 years ago, transforming what was a fairly standard corporate website into a digital magazine and a storytelling engine. And we did so at the time because we recognized that traditional public affairs and communications defined by press releases, engaging with media that covers the space simply wasn't cutting through the clutter anymore. Now, what we've learned since is that human-centered content does best, it spreads best. We like to say if it's not spread, it's not read when it comes to social. And if you care, you share. And the most shareable content, the most share-worthy content always has people at its heart, which has been a tough thing for our team and really the organization to absorb sometimes because we are a product company, as you know. So we have increasingly tilted even product coverage towards human-centered storytelling. What's the purpose of Journey? First and foremost, we are here to engage the conversation, not to dominate it, not to bring a bullhorn, not to say it's our way or the highway, but to engage the dialogue around who we are as a company. Yes, along the lines of certain passion points and themes, but at the end of the day, we hope we provide content via Journey at all of our sites and social handles around the world that first and foremost is readable, is delightful, is interesting. And yes, we hope we change minds in the process, but that is not where we start our storytelling. We do want to tell the deeper stories behind our work. We recognize we're lucky at a company like Coca-Cola that we really don't have a brand recognition problem. What we do have, however, is a storytelling challenge and opportunity. And I think everyone on this call can relate to that. We all feel in the lives we lead as digital natives, we just don't have enough time to get the full story out there. And as I mentioned, we've learned from our readers through the last 4.5 years and tens of thousands of pieces, long form, but increasingly video, animation, and design oriented, that human-centered stories really do the best job of telling the story behind the ad, behind the billboard, or even behind the controversy. And finally, and a good segue from controversy, we like to deliver content that makes a difference for the business. Yes, an element of that is engaging to shape the narrative, but most importantly, we want to jump into a dialogue. So again, not own it, but tell stories that participate in it, and inform when we have to inform. And we'll talk about some of those examples that provide, frankly, editorial tension, that are areas of controversy, a little bit later in the call. Before we get there, just structurally, so that you understand that Journey is not simply a digital magazine that's housed at Coca-ColaCompany.com, but it is increasingly an editorial machine that expresses itself through multiple social channels. I'll invite Jenny, who runs our content innovation and social media, to dive into that a little bit further.
So what exactly is Journey? Now, there are a lot of pieces that actually make up Journey. For most people, when they think of Journey, they think of the website. And that's true. We do have Journey, the website, our digital magazine, but we also have Unbottled, which is the blog that goes with it. And that's where we put everything from regular updates, breaking news, shorter stories, quick things that might be of interest to people. But more and more, as most people have noticed, that people are getting their news and their updates from their own networks. And that could be Facebook, that could be Twitter. And so we make sure that we're in all of those places. So that's why you'll see we have Twitter, we have Snapchat, we have Instagram. And so we make sure that we're in all those places and we're telling stories in all of those places that are unique to those places. All of that links back to those stories that we're telling on Journey and on Unbottled, but they're all unique to those platforms. And then what exactly and why exactly are we doing Coca-Cola Journey? Well, we can read out all these points here. We're humanizing the company. We're finding new ways to engage readers. But in reality, we're doing this, all of it, on Journey because it allows us a platform to really tell the stories of Coca-Cola. We're telling the stories of the people behind the company, like the homeless man who knocked on the doors of Coca-Cola one day and asked for a job and is now one of the happiest, most devoted security guards you've ever met, or maybe the story about empowering 5 million women in developing countries by 2020, Or maybe it's about how we're working our butts off to be a better company after being called out by the New York Times. Or maybe it's just the latest names you can get off of cherry Coke bottles. All of that is front and center of everything on Journey. Bottom line is, this is how we're able to tell our stories the way we want them told, because we know that the others are going to do it. Other people are going to be doing it, good or bad, true or false, and this is how we're able to do it our way.
And I think to extend upon that, it's not only telling our stories, but telling them in a way that engages our readers where they live. We all live digital lives today in our favorite networks, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, you name it. And increasingly, that editorial that Jenny mentioned in social is not exclusively designed to be a boomerang format and send readers back to the site. That's really where we started about 4 years ago. But we've recognized, based on our metrics and following our readers, that increasingly we live inside of our chosen networks. So if they want to live in Facebook all day, and we all have that aunt or uncle who does, we want them to be able to enjoy Journey content, some of which is exclusive to Facebook, that only lives and breathes inside of that network. If they happen to be a journalist who follows us for financials, we want them to have more interesting infographics with our earnings, which you can check us out next week on that front, because we have another set of quarterly announcements coming out. So we are eager to learn and always pushing ourselves, challenging ourselves to learn about those networks. And I'll be perfectly frank, and maybe this is some consolation for those of you on the call. I am, yes, average age older than many people on my team, but we all have our favorite networks. I'm still trying to figure out Snapchat. I'm just going to be brutally honest. We went to a 101 session. I actually sent Jenny to get educated on doing proper Snapchat. Not a problem for the younger team members on our staff, of course. So the point is this. We want to engage in the best way. Our readers and our critics would like to engage with us, or at least understand where we're coming from. And that's probably a good segue to the Q&A. So we're at our first break. So how would we like to, how would you like to proceed from there, guys?
We've got a couple questions already. So why don't I kick us off before we get to these quick questions? I have one, which is just this. This sounds an awful lot like you guys are practicing journalism, but your beat is exclusively the Coca-Cola organization, Coca-Cola company. Why this approach?
Well, again, going to the top of my comments, we recognized that we sensed that there was an opportunity to tell our story in a different way. And once you reduce that, you boil that down to its essence, that's really about telling stories. It took us a while to understand how transformative that is, particularly as a outgrowth of our public affairs and communications team, which has been trained as PR professionals. So there's a method to that, engaging media, talking through our positions, putting out press releases, and hoping they tell the story we think will best express us and the company. Or you can simply say, you know what, this is better told as a story. That's the first sort of evolutionary thing, which frankly took time for the system to understand. Since then, we've started dividing up our objectives as a communications team and saying some of these will just be told as stories. They will be told as infographics on Twitter. They will be told as a linked influencer post by our CEO, Muhtar Kent, or our soon-to-be CEO, James Quincy. We may not put out a press release at all. And once you get to that mode, you start hiring differently, because you're now looking at journalists, you're looking at English majors, you're looking at videographers. So you start to resemble, in many ways, a Now This News or a Mashable or a BuzzFeed more than you do a traditional PR unit. To that point, Jenny has extensive background in CNN.com and Linear before she joined the company. I came from a mobile product leadership background before I moved into social platforms at Coke. So, we bring together the art and the science, but we look a lot more like a publication, a digital magazine. That's why we use the term.
Gotcha. Question from Stephanie, who asks, social media provides critical promotion channels for human stories and increasingly pay to play and more difficult for brands and news outlets. How are you navigating this? What insights or advice do you have for others? So I suppose you guys, and I think one of the things we've talked about as we were planning this was that the budgets you actually use are fairly modest, but you're pretty thoughtful about how you use them. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Jenny, why don't you talk about, sort of our theory that there's nothing we can do with no budget, but there's a lot we can do with a little.
Yeah, I mean, Doug mentioned it before. We live in the public affairs world. We don't have the budgets that marketing has. We'd love to have those markets, but we don't have them. So we do operate on very small budgets. I'm a firm believer that you have to put money behind every single thing you do, but you don't have to put a lot of money. And when I say that, I mean a tiny amount. You can put $5 behind every post, but as long as you're putting a little bit of money behind everything, it's going to make a difference. We are very smart about everything we do. I jokingly say we are the biggest geeks around when it comes to social targeting. Every single piece of content we put out, we dig deep into it. We think about where it's going to go, who's going to be interested in it. We target that piece of content to those people, and we make sure that every single dollar we spend is spent wisely and very valuable, with a lot of value, so that we make sure that the people that do see it are the people that want to see it, and that when they see it, they're going to do something with it, so that we get a lot more organic spread on top of that small amount of paid.
Yeah, and two takeaways from a hiring and team perspective. Number one, try to be as in-house as you can. You're infinitely better off finding a junior, or starter talent who knows his or her way around the tools on the networks for paid than outsourcing to an agency, or at a minimum finding a good contractor who can come in and do that for you, but is dedicated to understanding how your stories best spread, who are the best audiences for your needs, for the needs of your organization.
So Elizabeth has a question. We're going to take this one and we're going to get back into the presentation. There's a number of good questions. I promise folks we're going to get to as many of these as we can, and some of your questions are going to be answered later in the presentation. Elizabeth asks, I'm looking over the Journey site, and I'm curious, which audience segment was most important for you to successfully engage with? And in your data, which audience segment have you had the most success with? Who are you talking to, and who have you had the most success talking to?
So it is effectively, this is going to sound ridiculous, and I don't want it to come off this way, but effectively, Journey is targeted at everyone. It is a digital magazine that has a wide set of audiences. How our targeting adjusts, however, it pivots off of the package, the content that we're releasing. So, for example, earnings, which is, as I mentioned, coming up pretty quickly. Yes, we have financial and financial-related influencers, reporters, stakeholders, potentially Wall Street folks, bankers, analysts, in our, targeting spec for those packages. But if we look at the move to a new CEO with James Quincy coming up in May, a big audience is our associates and our company alumni, our retirees, people who are going to be impacted by the changes James is bringing from the top down. So we focus and tune our storytelling for that, and therefore many of our Journey stories appear on Connect, which is our sister site, our intranet site. It is also a financial audience, so it's wonderful if Forbes picks up the same piece that was really designed to explain to the outside world, in that case the financial world, as much as our associates' his vision. It just varies based on the piece. Now, to answer the question of what surprised us the most, we are delighted that we have a majority millennial audience. We are delighted that our readership has shifted over time from weekday to weekend, because that says to us we're not simply a destination because by dint of having careers on the site and people are looking at jobs during their lunch break, by dint of having announcements about our financials, so maybe they're considering it when the markets are open. We have become more of a feature content destination. At the same time, we recognize when you're competing with the likes of the New York Times on a Sunday, or Vanity Fair, or Forbes, as I mentioned, these are publications that people tend to keep as destination reading of the weekend. You have to up your game. you have to make sure that you're legible in a tablet or a smartphone, because people are going to be reading you on a couch rather than on a potentially a laptop or even a PC at work. So that's a good example of what both excites us and challenges us simultaneously.
I think some of the questions we're getting are about how is this team built? It's neither fish nor fowl. So why don't we talk a little bit about how you're structured? I think that's where we're headed next.
Yeah. Do you want me just to jump into those slides and then we can ask more questions along those lines?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So perfect way to go. How are we structured? I'll start this by saying that our team is unique. It is a mix of artists and scientists. We are unique both inside the company and outside the company. We're unique inside the company because Jenny and I both came from teams that did this. The company usually divides itself between the marketers, the capital and marketers, and the enablers, whether it's an IT function or an outside agency partner, or even internal resources such as Jenny and I were for our marketing teams. Our team is different. We have editorial, creative, social, and platforms, so technology platforms, all under one roof. And that's important because like the rest of Coke, ours is a case of scale. So our team out of Atlanta, a team of 8, by the way, serves over now 49 countries, nearly 50. So we actually have one that was on and then off. That's why this number is off slightly on the slide. So a team of 8 supports local journey sites and social around the world, and that is a number that has grown from 1 to nearly 50 in 4.5 years. So there's a lot of scale. We focus on scale capability here at the center. To dig in a little bit further, because I know many of you may be looking at, okay, how do we tackle this on our side? We have a editor-in-chief, a gentleman by the name of Jay Moy, who is our content maven. He is responsible not only for making sure that the center site, which sits at Coca-ColaCompany.com, is full of fascinating, great digital magazine content. And we have a social and content innovation team, as I mentioned, which is led by Jenny. And we have a platform team, which is led by a woman by the name of Jan Schneider. Our markets resemble that structure basically with the exception of platform, because we handle all the technology requirements gathering from the markets that are within our network out of the center. We take that load off of our markets, although many of our market leads are quite technically sophisticated. Was talking to just one of them this morning. I would say he was talking to me, but he was actually complaining. But yeah, about our technology. So we gather all those requirements into a shared roadmap for technology, and then bring that technology back to our markets and train all the markets not only on how to publish out of their markets. This is a self-published model, which might be key for you guys to know on the call. So these are not solutions that require somebody to enter a ticket. They are trained on our environment, which, in case you're curious, is Adobe Experience Manager 6.1 if you're following versions. We also use, in addition to that, tools like Livefire, Brightcove, Gigya, and others. I'm probably forgetting several other tools on the platform side that make up a solution set that powers that self-publishing model around the world. So each site, each team has at least a writer, if not an editor, and several supporting writers or editors that may be in-house or agency supplied. So we do have freelancers and stringers around the world that support content creation. And I should also note that much of our greatest content comes from within. So these are either public affairs or communications people who have determined, as I mentioned earlier, rather than a press release, they're going to write a story. Frequently, we are pulling from associates themselves to tell their own stories. That's incredibly effective when, particularly when you're talking about office culture. What's it like for a millennial to work at Coca-Cola? The best voice is a voice of someone here doing the work themselves. So that gives you a sense of what our structure is like. To go a bit further into the types of stories we tell, we get this question frequently from marketing audiences, so I wanted to bring it to this audience as well, as I know many of you bridge the divide like we do. How do we connect with the brand and capital M marketing side of the business? Well, if you look at what brand marketers at a company like Coca-Cola do, they start from a paid focus and then move into earned and shared, which is really for us social environments, and then finally owned. They don't view the vehicles they use as owned, although technically we have trucks that are owned, we have billboards that are owned, but most of our marketers are going to focus on, I have a paid media budget, I have sales goals for my product, whether it's Smart Water or Adwala or Tab, yes, we still make it. They are focused on how do I use this paid budget and what's the best allocation of resources within that. Out of that, they do tell stories. Every campaign we do on the advertising side is a story. Coca-Cola has a rich, multi-decade history of being, I'd like to think, some of the best storytellers out there. That's where Journey overlaps with the brand side. But we come from an inherently different motivator in that we operate an owned media vehicle, if you will. We operate this digital magazine network and storytelling engine called Journey. Then we look at how those stories are told in social and earned environments, and then move into paid. And that paid, font is small for a reason, as Jenny mentioned. We are the exact opposite of our friends on the marketing side when it comes to budgets. So we have to spend every dollar as wisely as we can. But in toto, this really represents a content continuum. The way of explaining this is, if you happen to be one of our consumers, you drink Fairlife milk, and you picked it up at Target over a weekend, and you want to learn more about Fairlife, and you happen to search that via Google, and you happen to do a Journey story. That Journey story should link to what you've seen on the marketing side from the company. If Olympics are happening, you should be able to go to any Journey site in your market and see more about the Olympics, the story behind the ad, or the athletes we're working with, or the anthem, the song that plays in the ad. So ideally, it represents, all put together, a content continuum. The brands will tend to focus on, as I said, brand activation. So you're going to see Santa Claus in the United States when it comes to Christmas and Coca-Cola advertising. You're going to see Easter-related if it's around if Easter's happening, or Passover. If there's a global integrated campaign, you're going to see more about that global campaign. Journey then sort of takes the baton from marketing and explains the deeper story behind the campaigns you're seeing. On the lower left-hand side is a tweet from one of my absolute favorite pieces we've done, because it so exemplifies how we stretch every marketing dollar that our partners in global marketing, and in this case, North America marketing, so the U.S. marketing team, specifically Coke, spend. These are cans that rolled out with our Super Bowl promotion last year, which our lawyers inform me I have to say is the big game, quote unquote, because we're not sponsors, the big game sponsorship. These cans were a part of an ad you might have remembered that featured Marvel's Hulk and Ant-Man. The point of the ad was to let you know that we have a wide variety of mini cans available. We want to enable choice for all our consumers. So if you want, 12 ounce or an 8 ounce, you have options. These cans, however, had these really striking, almost monochromatic graphic designs of the leading Marvel characters. And so our team went in and talked to the marketing team and said, what are those cans about? And one of the marketers said, actually, this is an amazing story. It's a self-taught graphic designer who literally was, a foster child and learned how to design hopping from foster home to foster home in LA. It's an incredible story of his life. He ended up, by the way, with a wonderful family eventually that empowered this gift he had. So it's just an excellent story, and you can look at it and say, okay, great, that's connected to a Coke campaign, I get it. What we look at it as is great return on that investment and telling a deeper story that goes way beyond that ad you might have missed when you got up to go to the fridge or something during the game. Now finally, in Journey, we expand beyond those stories to all sorts of untold stories around the company and who we are about. You're going to see obvious things told in interesting ways, like our earnings. So moving our earnings announcements from a bunch of tweets that probably get passed right by, even for our intended stakeholder audiences on Wall Street or financial outlets, to infographics that tell the story graphically, to areas like sustainability, water replenishment, female leadership and entrepreneurship. These are stories that come from units in the company that effectively have little to no marketing dollars at all. They are not running ads in Olympics. They are not running ads at major sporting events. You're not going to see Plant Bottle on the side of a NASCAR racing car. We're there to be their marketing arm. We're there to tell their stories. And then finally, stories that just surprise and delight that don't have a natural home otherwise. For example, everyone wants to know the story of the McDonald's Shamrock Shake. We launched products like Surge, which is a product that we had on the shelves from the 90s to the early aughts, but was a brand new product we returned to Amazon.com 2 years ago. Ecto Cooler, same story when we relaunched that with the new Ghostbusters. So going into our archives and finding the original pieces that are connected with that history and then reigniting the brand effectively through that storytelling. Now, I wanted to talk about how, in many instances, these stories are designed not only to speak to the unicorns and rainbows, if you will, at the company. We dive into and run towards challenges. We run into communications crises. One of them was transparency. So 2 years ago, and many of you might have read of this, the New York Times released a report that suggested the company was investing in institutions, colleges, nonprofits, universities among them, to research, frankly, the dietary impact of our products. It did not reflect well on the company, suffice it to say. And the piece was so impactful that not only did Muhtar Kent, our CEO, decide immediately to jump into the topic area, write his own op-ed, which ended up appearing within several days in the Wall Street Journal, but effectively to become transparent, to speak openly about what we had done in this space, how we got to where we were, and why we were stopping it, but to go a step further, to literally be transparent about the investments we had made. So the challenge was passed along to our team to most effectively respond. And our reaction was, well, in digital terms, the most transparent thing is search. When you want to know more information about anything, we all go to a search engine, Google, Bing, Yahoo, you name it. So why don't we take the investment history that we need to make sure is out there to be fully transparent and create a searchable database and post it on the site. And out of that, within, again, a matter of days, we launched transparency on the Journey site. So if you go to transparency.coca-colacompany.com, you can read the op-ed, updates and status on the program, and search on the organization name, the type of investment, the amount of investment, and learn status updates on the program. This, by the way, is a Little P platform that we are rolling out to multiple geographies around the world. So this doesn't simply sit at the United States because we happen to be headquartered there. Anywhere where we've made these investments in any significant amount, we plan to roll out a companion transparency site. So I do not want anyone on this call thinking that our digital magazine is home only to stories we want to tell or happy stories. It's stories that we need to tell. And that's what we believe marks us as different from simply brochureware about the company. We will entertain, engage, and run into areas of editorial tension, as my boss, Ben Deutsch, likes to call it. I know many of you are probably aware of at least the original New York Times piece, so I thought this would be helpful to bring up on this call. And the takeaway for me, really for all of you, is that, and we can talk about recent events, United, our friends over at other beverage companies, Journey, if it's not there and you haven't built a storytelling tradition for your organization, it's that much harder when a crisis hits to engage. If you want to play catch up in the midst of a crisis and you haven't established that storytelling unit, it will be that much harder to get your perspective out. And that's probably a good place to jump into the next Q&A break.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and if you don't mind, we had a really interesting conversation as we were rehearsing this about the Dr. Dow situation, the United Airlines passenger who was forcibly removed from his seat and the subsequent crisis communications gone wrong at the United company. I think most folks in communications agree they did not do a great job there. Explain to me, just if you could, tease out a little bit more about how you all were prepared and how this was actually a real asset, having the Journey platform. Because obviously, if you work in nonprofits and the foundation space, they are not without their own opportunities to see things go awry.
Yeah, I speak a lot to my compatriots and my colleagues in communications and crisis communications, which is another subset of our team, and marketing, about the 3 Ps, that anytime you're facing the need for an emergency response, you need the process, the path, and the people. We have effectively built what I'd like to think is one of the top in-house news organizations in Journey, and one that is geographically spread around the world, and staffed it with people who know how to turn around truthful, authentic stories quickly and then deliver it through social paths. So anytime, whether it's United or otherwise, that you're dealing with a major crisis, if you don't have any of those Ps available, if you will, the platforms or the path, you're not going to have a plan. So the crisis that erupted around that flight and what happened on that flight wasn't helped, I think, by not having folks that were attuned to that. But I think it makes it that much more difficult when they're reacting in an overheated social media. So it's another takeaway for us that we have to continue to tune our social paths to be ready to engage when needed in circumstances like that. We look to events like that as frankly, lessons for how we can better do our job and better tell our stories. Jenny, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I totally agree. I think that having a platform like Journey gives us a leg up where so many people don't have such a tool. It makes it easier to respond, but it also gives us, this is probably a terrible way to say it, but more of a rope as well. Mm-hmm. So we have to be a lot smarter.
Absolutely.
When we're judging. I mean, there's often an instinct to, we have this platform, let's get something out.
Right.
So we have to be a lot smarter when there is something to respond to, not to have a knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, and I noticed that one of the other questions that were on here is, how do you deal with negative feedback? And when it comes in fast and furious like that, one of the shared backgrounds on the team, sort of in our DNA, is we come from either media or specifically social media environments. So we understand social listening tools. We do look at the speed and velocity of a conversation. We do look at sentiment to some extent. I helped build out, in my prior role with the company, our global social media platform. So we know we have dedicated team members over there who will quickly tell us, okay, this is something that is trending but is going to move on pretty quickly. This is something that is, frankly, driven by a couple of influencers or is gaining traction outside of that many influencers. And this is where really you have to springboard off of the science into the art and suggest that to management, it may not be best to pour gasoline on this particular spark and have it turn into a fire, because we recognize that not just the brand, but as Jenny mentioned, our followers and readers can act as a bullhorn to a conversation. And in fact, that is not going to be the best result for open discourse or dialogue. So we do have, for as many stories as we eagerly publish, there are stories that we push back on publishing for that reason, because time may be the best thing on our side for a topic to cool before we jump into it, and we do generally try to avoid any sort of direct engagement, which is a social best practice in general.
So Allison has a question here that I think is a nice segue. She writes, unlike traditional journalism, content that comes from Coca-Cola is probably seen as having a very clear agenda, a very clear goal, ultimately selling the product. How do you get around the appearance of bias or marketing to tell those human stories authentically in a way that really connects? So how do you get past the idea that I'm hearing a story and it's coming directly from Coca-Cola, so I immediately have to put a grain of salt in my mouth or something like that?
Sure. You know what? We put brand in front of journalism for a reason. We are certainly no qualms about it. We are, Journey is in the business of telling what we always hope are share-worthy, authentic, engaging stories, maybe occasionally controversial, maybe stories that cause friction or at a minimum hope to expand understanding, but always with a direction towards the business. So we have no shame about the fact that we are telling stories on behalf of the company, and we recognize that there are those who will immediately discount what we're saying because of that. We would rather have that. We would rather have that skepticism as a challenge to our voice and our style of storytelling than to ever represent ourselves disingenuously, to ever hide behind an advertorial or an anonymous name. So we feel that of all the adjectives we apply to or hope to apply or hope our readers, and maybe you guys now that you've been introduced to Journey would think, is truthful. That's the number one objective. Agree or disagree, question the source or not. That at the end of the day is, we think, the best way to expand understanding of the company and what we do. That's why we try as much as we can, and I saw that this question was raised otherwise, to have human-centered stories. That can't always happen. By the way, this may not be a great week for that because you're going to see a lot of bottles on the homepage because of our Share a Coke announcement. But we try, to really start from the perspective of a human, because we find that those stories generally have the best way of sort of level setting expectations on the part of the reader. And even if he or she discounts the source, they at least walk away with a better understanding of the company. And we think that's a challenge facing any company that's been around as long as we have and has, frankly, the onus and the opportunity of a brand that's as well known as ours is.
The only time I would say that we do not splash our brand all over things is when we're doing stories like 5x20.
Right.
Because those stories, the idea there is to put the focus on the women.
Absolutely.
And the work being done there. Because we do not want people to focus on Coca-Cola there. The idea is to focus on the women and the work that they're doing. And we do know often that if we do put Coca-Cola in front of that, people will discount that message. That they'll say, look, Coca-Cola is trying to take credit for, look at this good work.
But I would say that is a great example of a human-centered story and a human-centered effort. And that's where it makes it easier to say it really is about the program. Right. I think the question was coming from a different perspective, which is to say even that, if it's published on a Journey channel, is going to be viewed as, brochureware, if you will, for the company. And I understand that. My point was only that we don't avoid that. We recognize that as a reality, and we would much rather have that than any suggestion that we were somehow pump priming or being disingenuous about who's writing it.
Right. I'm definitely not.
Let's take one more question, then we'll jump into the last part of our presentation here, which has just been tremendous. Thank you so much. Araz asks, in such a big company, obviously you're a global presence, how do you hear these stories from other departments, i.e., how do you know what investments your company is making, and how do you tell that story? So I guess the question would be, how do you guys practice enterprise journalism?
Yeah, we are always and forever and constantly engaging our colleagues. And it is everything from methodical, recurring opportunities, as I mentioned earlier, putting journey stories into our Connect, our intranet homepage. So maybe people stop on the way there before they go check their pay stub, as an example, all the way over to when we talk in the team about speaking engagements. I like to remind all of us that more than half of our speaking engagements should be internal. We should be talking to our diversity council. We should be talking to our Millennial Voices team. We should be out and about on campus. And that's everything from laptop stickers that have Journey on it to simply being available, because we know that as a small team, as a team of 8, of which only half are dedicated to content, we could tell stories only about those literally on this campus in our Atlanta headquarters and never run out of great stories to tell. The arbiter, again, is truthful stories that are in the voice of Journey. So my job, effectively as publisher, assisting Jenny and Jay, our editor-in-chief, sometimes comes down to stories that we can't find the Journey angle on. Stories perhaps that come from a customer team that are simply retweeting something one of our great customers did. That might be fine PR, but it does not qualify automatically as a story, because we recognize that we are entrusted by our readers and followers to continue to tell those stories, and we will lose followers, and we will get hidden in timelines if we revert in some way to being, frankly, a corporate shill as opposed to a brand journalism network.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I know we just want to be mindful of our time. Why don't we go ahead and move into this last section of your presentation, which, for those of you who had a few questions about Mad Men and the finale, we're about to get there, guys.
So, for the business, so what, right? Why do we do this? And why would you do this as a nonprofit? Well, the fact of the matter is you can drown in data when it comes to digital and social. There are a million ways to cut data that comes out of social media, that comes out of a website. You have to zero in on those metrics that matter. And one way in which we count metrics that matter is, and a premier way for us, is engagement. If they, as I mentioned at the top of the call, if you care, you share. And if a story's not spread, it's not read. So we evaluate on the basis of a simple up is better benchmark every single piece of content we publish in the network. That in-house metric is expressions of interest. So you'll see this acronym EOI. By the way, I'm more than happy to send you guys that formula. It's not a protected formula like other things we have around here. We want folks to use it and share it. We found it to be a very useful way of understanding network-wide which content is doing well and which is not. This was a little bit of a home run for us with Mad Men. Spoiler alert, for those of you who've not yet binge-watched Mad Men, I'm going to talk about the finale. You should have caught up by now because, honestly, I'm a dad of a 3-year-old, and if you haven't caught up to Mad Men, you're way, way behind. This was an absolute bluebird opportunity for the company. We had been working with the showrunners of Mad Men and IMC for seasons, actually going all the way back to the show's incarnation. There was never a signed document between the companies. In fact, Mr. Weiner, who's the showrunner and creator, called our main switchboard and asked to talk to who was then our chief marketing officer, Joe Tripodi. We didn't believe him, so we called him back. And his pitch was simple. I'm going to do a show on the history of modern advertising called Mad Men, and I want to treat all the brands, including yours, as characters in the show. So we would receive requests from the production company for 6 Fanta bottles from 1958, and our historian and archivist Ted Ryan would go down to our archive and get those bottles and ship them out to an undisclosed location, and they would come back 2 months later, in perfect shape, and we had no idea what they were doing with them, and we would watch the show. They'd ask for vending machines. They'd ask for, T-shirts. So we had a phenomenal relationship with the show, and we were not surprised when they asked for the best possible copy of Hilltop, as we call it. You probably know it as I'd Like to Buy the World a Coke. Again, we had no idea how they were going to use it. We knew simply that they planned to use it in the finale, and we were instructed very clearly to say nothing until 2:01 a.m. Monday morning East Coast time, so all the time zones would have a chance to see the show, in the U.S. at least, before we published anything about it. We prepared a package of content that included stories we had already written on the ad. Obviously, we wouldn't be the company's digital magazine if we hadn't talked about I'd Like to Buy the World of Coke. But we added news stories, interviews with the showrunners, the producers, John Hamm himself, our account executive at McCann. The agency that was in the show was not fictional. We had a 30-year relationship with them as our agency of record. So this entire package was incredibly successful on social. It was highly engaging content. It just absolutely blew up. Not everybody has a wonderful opportunity like that, we recognize, but we feel like we did a good job of, again, not dominating the conversation, but engaging the conversation. Supplying the answers people had. Is Don Draper a real person? No. Did we work with McCann? Yes. Did we win awards? Yes. How did they come up with the idea for the story? Did it have anything to do with meditation, right? That's one way of, that's a metric that matters to us internally as a team of storytellers. Now, this is what matters to my boss, frankly, and his boss, and many of our media relations friends on the floor. These outlets and others ended up linking directly to Journey stories around the Mad Men finale. They didn't do so by prefacing it with a Coca-Cola spokesperson said or a Coca-Cola historian offered, or they didn't put it behind any sort of anonymous shield. They simply linked to Journey stories as matters of record. We were honored by that. As communications professionals, we felt this was a true credit to the type of storytelling we were bringing to the conversation. And again, participating in this cultural moment, not dominating this cultural moment. We learn lessons as we go, and one of the things we took from not simply Mad Men, but all the other work other publishers have done, like BuzzFeed, and frankly other now brand journalists have done at companies like Target and Levi's and elsewhere. We love listicles. We love top fives. We love Q&As. They work for our world. People are in love with FAQs. So we applied that to the ascension of our new CEO, James Quincy, and we had 5 questions and answers with Muhtar Kent, our current CEO, and James. This was a phenomenal piece for us to work on. In fact, originally we said, do you want some help with the questions we might ask? And Quincy and Muhtar were so casual. They said, no, we want to do this. Let's do this live. Let's come up with this. This story did incredibly well, and to the point of stakeholders. In this case, obviously, players like Wall Street Journal and CNBC are exactly who we would hope on the media relations side would even mention, quotes or snippets from this. Just 5-6 years ago, we would have said, oh, it's wonderful that they used a quote that was in the press release. Isn't that incredible? Well, all of these outlets went much further than that. They copy-pasted and republished the entire Q&A. So think of the evolutionary leaps in storytelling that are involved from moving from a press release mentality where we cross our fingers and hope that somebody in the media might understand our story to actually publishing our story. Yeah. That simply means that we have to increase our focus on truthful and authentic storytelling, because obviously these august outlets would never have taken it on if they didn't trust that and didn't trust the sourcing for their readers. Obviously, as a digital outlet, we do track all of the main metrics. So in case you're interested, we have had 145 million page views since we launched in 2012. We have, on average, about 3.4 million visitors per month. We're quite proud of the fact that that's now split evenly between Coca-ColaCompany.com, the center site digital magazine, and those around the world, which includes, in many cases, the real innovators in our system, Germany, Australia, Great Britain, and others. So I invite you to go to the site and click on country up in the very top nav, and you can look at all the sites from Morocco to Japan, China, and everything in between. How does that stack up? Well, based on data just this month, that 3.4 million visits per month bigger than a johnsonandjohnson.com, more traditional corporate destination, but also in the range of an Ad Age, certainly a lot bigger than a PR Week. For sizing purposes, New York Times gets around 365 million.
That's really gross.
What's that? Visits. So we have a lot of room to grow. But if we get published by them, we'll take that multiplier effect. But I didn't want you to think that we don't compare ourselves to real metrics of other publishers. So with that, again, we're going to open up to Q&A, and just would love to hear what you guys have to say about what we're doing at Journey.
Yeah.
Thanks, you guys, very, very much. We have a few questions, and I also want to be mindful of time. Melissa asks, what are the budgets that you're using? And so I think this goes to headcount, and just if you can, ballpark, if it's not proprietary, what kind of a budget did it take to get started? What kind of a budget does it take to sustain Journey? Are we talking millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars?
So I will say that we always have to be careful about this, and we're right in the middle of a corporate reorganization, so I want to be super careful about this. The most substantial portion of our budget has traditionally been around platform, because we do operate the content management system and all the supporting and technical infrastructure on behalf of our sites around the world. So that has understandably been the biggest cost. Our paid budget is minimal. As I mentioned earlier, it is six-figure. That's about as far as I can go on that. And we do the very best we can, as Jenny mentioned, to make effective use of every single dollar. I'll also point out that we partner a lot for our budgets, both technology and paid and content. So we're frequently teaming with customer teams or the sustainability team or the marketing teams, and benefit sometimes from their budgets as well. We've gotten pretty creative with OPM, other people's money, because we hope that the stories we tell express and make a difference for those business units.
If you were to walk out of the Coca-Cola company tomorrow and walk into, I'm just going to make something up here, the Carnegie Corporation of New York, and with the intended purpose of setting up a journalism project similar to Journey, what are the first two or three things that you would feel like you had to do to get started?
The first exercise I go through, and I think it was critical, no, don't take Jay. The first exercise, though, is related to Jay Moy, our editor-in-chief.
Can't have him.
Brainstorming your voice, coming up with the tenets of your editorial, and this is always an ongoing, it's a living document, but we do have a playbook for our content that spells out what we know to be the most effective Journey voice possible. It is our litmus test for content, for story angles, for hooks that we go after, and those that we avoid. So the first is discovering what your voice is, and one way of discovering that is simply listening to the channels that your audiences listen to. So, tracking down those journalists or influencers that your target audiences as an organization track, finding out what makes their most successful content click, and drawing from that the best you can to develop your voice. So I'd say start there. I'd also say don't underestimate the power of well-written content and surprising sources, journalism programs around the United States, internship programs, teaming with other publications to get into surprising areas of content to sort of expand your audience. So start from the best story for your stakeholders, the best story voice for your stakeholders, and then slowly move that circle out as you learn and grow.
Fantastic. And I think we are now out of time, so this is the part where I get to say thank you to both Doug and Jenny. Very, very generous of you to give us your time and share your insights and what you've been learning along the way. It's a wonderful model for all of us to look to. Really, really grateful for you for being so forthright and generous. Want to let everybody know we will be gathering for you network members or others who want to be with us. We're going to be down in Miami Beach in September. If you haven't signed up for the conference yet, I hate to say this, but we are over 50% sold out, which means by the time you may get ready to pull the trigger, you may not be able to. We sell out every single year. Also want to let you know our Change Agent Journal, which we publish twice a year, is coming out probably in about a month's time. Would you say that, Tristan, a month and a half? The focus this next issue will be on research and data and communications. We heard an awful lot about how Coke is using research and thinking about the science of communications. It's something we know that everyone should be doing. So we'd encourage you to do that. And then finally, before you all hop off the line, I know we're losing a few of you, please do take the moment to take the survey that'll pop up. That helps us get better every single time out of the gate. So thanks very much for joining us. Do appreciate it. My thanks again to Doug and Jenny for being so generous with your time. Do appreciate it. See you all soon.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Hey guys, thank you so much. That was really excellent. I knew we were going to have a good one based on the rehearsal, but that was really tremendous. We ended up with a little over 200 folks. We'll have a count for you shortly. But
wow.
Suffice to say, just looking around the room, I know that we had like the Wilson Center for International Studies, the Carnegie Corporation, the Lumina Foundation, Ford Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, World Wildlife Fund. There were a lot of really tremendous organizations on the line here.
That's really cool. All people I hear when I listen to NPR sponsors.
I thought that went really well. I was trying to track up some of the Q&A in the stream, and I was resisting responding to some. And I know it's disappointing when we can't expose things like real numbers. That's where I get in a lot of trouble. But do know and feel free to express to members what I can do in a one-off call, and I'm happy to engage folks if they give me a little bit of calendar flexibility, is probably quite a bit deeper. It's just having a 300-person room with some journalists on the call it makes that challenging.
No, totally get it. Absolutely get it. And if you guys would, I think the EOI thing is something that I really saw one or two people ask for. Yeah. So my guess is there's some interest there for sure.
Absolutely.
Follow up with
So we can give that a shot.
She has the full deck, though. I mean,
okay.
She's been, we can just ask Natalie for the current deck.
Okay.
That's my point. Yeah, cool. Yeah, we'll get you the deck on that, and thanks again for the opportunity.
No, thank you. I hope that you guys might be able to join us down in Miami. I think what you're doing is really incredible. I feel like folks would love to have a chance to talk to you one-on-one.
Well, hey, look, I always look for an excuse to go down to Miami. So.
All right, we're going to kick out of this room, Rich. We got to run.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.